My mom criticized me as a stupid child at Christmas, and what I told her that night changed everything. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old, and Christmas with my family has never really been the joyful kind you see in movies. This year wasn't any different. We were sitting around the table, half-eaten ham and mashed potatoes in front of us, wrapping paper scattered across the floor from the earlier gift exchange. The air smelled like cinnamon and pine, but the tension was thicker than anything scented. I had just unwrapped a sweater from my aunt. It was a simple thing, soft blue wool with a tag still hanging on it. I fumbled for a second with the tag, trying to pull it off without scissors, when my mom's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. God, Emily, you've always been so stupid. Can't even open a sweater properly. The words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I froze, the tag still dangling from the sleeve, and felt my face burn. Around the table, my relatives chuckled awkwardly, as if laughing along would soften the cruelty. My cousin avoided my eyes, my aunt gave a nervous smile, and my brother Daniel smirked into his drink. Not one person told my mom to stop. It wasn't the first time she had said something like that. Honestly, it had been my whole life. As a kid, if I struggled with math homework, she'd roll her eyes and tell me I was slow. If I mispronounced a word, she'd say, "Your brother never made mistakes like that." Margaret Carter, my mom, had a way of making every small error feel like proof that I was defective. Tonight was just another reminder. But in that moment, sitting there with everyone watching, the humiliation cut deep. I wasn't a child anymore. I had worked for years to build a life of my own. I had fought through nursing school, taken double shifts to pay my tuition, and bought my own home without a penny of her help. Yet here I was, still being reduced to the little girl she used to scold. I tried to laugh it off, but my throat felt tight. The laughter around me didn't feel kind. It felt like they all agreed with her. My eyes went to Daniel, her golden boy, the one she always praised. He was grinning, enjoying the moment, like it was his favorite Christmas tradition. Mom tearing me down. I wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the chair, but a fire began to spark in my chest. For the first time, I realized just how long I had let her words control me. And for the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't going to let it happen again. When I think back to growing up in that house, the memories come with a sharp edge. My mother never missed a chance to remind me that I wasn't enough. Daniel, my older brother, was always the shining example. He got straight A's, made the basketball team, and every report card turned into a celebration. Mine, on the other hand, became proof of my supposed failures. If I brought home a B, she would wrinkle her nose like it smelled bad. Daniel never brought home grades like this, she'd say. When I asked for help with homework, she sighed and told me I was just slow, that I'd never pick things up the way he did. Those words sank deeper than I wanted them to, and before long I stopped asking for help at all. She had names for me, little daggers dressed as casual remark. Lazy, not smart enough, scatterbrained. Each label became part of me, something I carried into every classroom and every hallway at school. Teachers would tell me to speak up, but the moment I opened my mouth, I could almost hear her voice in my head reminding me how stupid I sounded. Daniel, meanwhile, lived under a different sun. When he struck out at baseball, she clapped for him anyway. If he came home with a C, she blamed the teacher, not him. Every effort he made was praised, even when it didn't amount to much. It was like he could do no wrong, while I could do no right. The hardest part wasn't even the comparisons. It was the way she seemed to believe them so completely. She never once looked at me with pride, never once told me I was capable. I started to believe she didn't want me to succeed at all. If I managed something good, she found a way to dim it. If I spoke about dreams for the future, she waved them off like fairy tales. At school, the damage showed. I sat in the back of the classroom, afraid to raise my hand. I second-guessed every answer, even when I knew it was right. Kids sensed the weakness, and bullies picked at me the same way my mother did. It felt like I had no safe place. Not at home, not at school, not even in my own head. Meanwhile, Daniel flourished with her constant cheerleading. He walked with confidence, smiled easily, and seemed certain the world would welcome him. And in many ways, it did. He was the golden child, raised on steady doses of approval, while I learned to live in shadows. Looking back, the betrayal wasn't just the words she chose. It was the deliberate way she built him up while tearing me down, as if she'd already decided only one of her children was worth investing in. And it wasn't me. As I got older, something inside me shifted. I couldn't erase the words that had been drilled into me, but I could fight against them in my own way. Instead of collapsing under the weight of them, I decided I was going to push back quietly, step by step. I told myself that if my mother couldn't see anything valuable in me, I would have to create proof she couldn't ignore. The first real test came after high school. I didn't ask for money, didn't beg for guidance. I worked part-time at a diner, saving tips in an old jar while filling out applications. When the acceptance letter finally came, I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else. Loans, scholarships, extra shifts. Whatever it took, I did it. I studied late into the night, sometimes falling asleep with textbooks on my chest, because I wanted to prove I could do more than anyone thought. Nursing wasn't easy. The program pushed me to my limits, but I refused to back down. Every exam passed felt like another stone laid in the foundation of a life I was building on my own. I learned to balance exhaustion and determination, showing up for patients in training shifts with a smile, even when I was running on nothing but coffee. There were times I wanted to quit, but the thought of my mother smirking and calling me a failure kept me going. Years later, walking across that graduation stage in my cap and gown, I didn't see her face in the crowd. Part of me wanted her there, wanted to hear applause that never came. But I had done it. I had become a nurse without leaning on her or anyone else. Work became my safe place. Long hours at the hospital, endless responsibilities. I thrived in it. The paycheck grew steadier, and eventually I had enough tucked away to think about more than just survival. I toured small houses on my days off, running my fingers along the walls, imagining what it would feel like to own something that was truly mine. When the keys finally landed in my hand, I cried in the driveway. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but every brick, every inch of it represented my own strength. Still, I kept it hidden from her. I never sent pictures, never invited her. The fear of hearing her dismiss it as too small, or a waste of money lingered. I told relatives only in passing, asking them not to mention it. It was easier to celebrate in silence than to hand her another chance to cut me down. And yet, buried deep beneath all that caution, I held on to a fragile wish. Maybe one day she would look at me differently. Maybe she'd notice the career, the house, the independence, and feel even a flicker of pride. I told myself I didn't need it, but the truth was, I still longed for it more than I wanted to admit. The room was filled with the glow of twinkling lights and the sound of silverware clinking against plates. Everyone was talking over one another, voices tangled with laughter and the crackle of the fireplace. I tried to focus on the food in front of me, cutting small bites of turkey, keeping my head down. For a while, it almost felt like I could blend into the background unnoticed. Then, out of nowhere, my mother's voice rose above the chatter. "You'll never be smart like your brother, no matter how old you get." She didn't whisper it, didn't try to hide it. It was sharp, deliberate, meant to land like a slap in front of the whole family. The air seemed to freeze. A few people gave uneasy smiles, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. I could feel all their eyes shifting toward me. My fork hovered in midair, my appetite gone in an instant. Daniel broke the silence with a chuckle. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head as if he agreed completely. "She's got a point," he said, grinning at me. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a performance, one he'd perfected over years of standing at her side, making sure I felt smaller. My chest tightened, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Tears threatened to spill, but I blinked them back hard, refusing to give them that satisfaction. I kept my lips pressed together, jaw aching from the effort of holding it all in. For years, I had let comments like this slide by, swallowing the sting, pretending it didn't matter. I told myself I was too old to care, that their opinions didn't hold weight anymore. But sitting there under the glow of Christmas lights, with Daniel smirking and my mother smirking even wider, something cracked open inside me. It wasn't the first insult, not by a long shot, but it was the last straw. I had built a life on my own, carried myself through storms they never even knew about, and still, here I was, treated like nothing. Something about the timing, the audience, the way she delivered it with such certainty. This time it didn't just sting. It lit a fire. I straightened in my chair, the weight of silence settling heavy around me. For once, I didn't look away. I looked right at her, and though my throat felt tight, I knew I wasn't going to keep quiet. Not tonight. The decision came without hesitation. I was done being her punchline, done letting Daniel fuel it, done shrinking to make the evening easier. I didn't know exactly what words would come out yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her take my voice again. I set my fork down carefully, the clink against the plate sharper than I intended. My hands were steady, though inside I felt a storm building. Everyone was still watching, waiting for me to laugh it off like I always did. But instead, I lifted my head and let the words come. "You've been calling me stupid my whole life," I said, my voice even, almost too calm. "But I've built more on my own than you'll ever give me." The sound in the room shifted instantly. Chairs stopped creaking, glasses froze halfway to mouths. For the first time all evening, my mother didn't have something ready on her tongue. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. Daniel tried to fill the silence with a chuckle. "Come on, Em, it's just Mom being Mom. You know how she jokes." He waved his hand like it was all harmless, like I was overreacting. But I didn't smile. I didn't soften my words. A joke? That's what you call it. You weren't the one listening to it every single day. You weren't the one told over and over that you'd never be enough. My voice was steady, but there was heat underneath, a raw truth I had never let out before. My mother shifted in her chair, crossing her arms, glaring as if I had just broken some unspoken rule. I didn't let her stare stop me. You didn't raise me to believe in myself. You raised me to believe I was less than him, I said, nodding toward Daniel. Every time I tried to do something, you cut me down. Every time I dreamed, you crushed it before it could even start. The silence pressed heavier with each word. My aunt's fork slipped from her fingers, clattering against her plate, but no one moved to pick it up. Eyes darted between me and my mother, like they couldn't believe someone was finally saying out loud what had been true all along. Daniel leaned forward, his grin faltering. Don't be so dramatic. You're making it weird. I looked at him and shook my head. Weird is pretending this hasn't been happening my whole life. Weird is watching it happen and laughing along. His face reddened, and for once he had nothing clever to add. I turned back to my mother, who still hadn't spoken. You thought I'd stay quiet forever, but I won't. Not tonight. The weight of the moment sat on the table between us, heavier than the untouched food. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Anger, yes, but also surprise. She hadn't expected me to stand up, and I knew I wasn't finished yet. I drew in a slow breath, the quiet around the table giving me all the space I needed. My voice was steady, but each word carried weight I'd been holding back for years. You think I've done nothing. You think I'm still the kid you could tear apart. But let me make something clear. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the faces staring at me. I bought my house. Every brick, every board, every bill, it's mine. No mortgage hanging over me, no handouts. Just my own work. Aunt Linda's eyebrows lifted. My cousin's mouth fell open slightly. My mother's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her napkin. I kept going. I worked my way through school, and I didn't just scrape by. I built a career. I'm head nurse now. I manage a whole team, and I earn more than enough to stand on my own. There was a faint murmur around the table. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. My mother's lips pressed tighter together, but she still hadn't spoken. Then I turned toward Daniel. And while you've been worshiping him all these years, let's talk about the truth. He's still living under your roof. He's buried in debt. He can't even keep a job longer than a few months. But somehow, I'm the one you keep calling stupid. Daniel's face flushed crimson. That's not, he started, but his voice cracked and he stopped. He glanced at the others, but no one came to his defense this time. I looked straight at my mother then, not flinching. So tell me again, I said, each word sharp and deliberate. Who's stupid? The words hung in the air like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. The silence was thick, only broken by the creak of a chair as someone shifted uncomfortably. For the first time all night, I noticed heads nodding. My uncle gave a small grunt of agreement. My aunt looked at me with something close to sympathy. Even my younger cousin, who had been glued to his phone most of the evening, glanced up and gave me a single, quiet nod. It was as if the entire room had finally woken up, seeing what I had carried all along. My mother blinked rapidly, her jaw tightening, but she still refused to speak. Daniel opened his mouth again, but quickly shut it when he realized no one was laughing with him anymore. I sat back in my chair, pulse racing, but for the first time, I didn't feel small. The truth was out, raw and undeniable, and there was no stuffing it back into silence. My mother's silence didn't last. Her face turned red, and when she finally spoke, her voice cut through the air like broken glass. How dare you talk to me like that? You're disrespectful. After everything I've done, this is how you repay me? By humiliating me at my own table. The force of her words made a few relatives flinch. She slammed her hand on the table, rattling the glasses, as though the noise alone might drown out what I'd just said. Daniel jumped in almost immediately, leaning forward with that same protective swagger he always used when defending her. She's right, Em. You're crossing the line. Mom's just being honest, and you're twisting it into something else. You're making her sound like the bad guy when she's always taken care of us. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Uncle Ron let out a dry laugh. Taken care of you, maybe, he said, his eyes fixed on Daniel. You're 31 and still living off her. You haven't paid a bill in your life. Daniel stiffened, his grin vanishing. That's not true, he started, but Aunt Linda cut him off. It is true, and you know it. Emily worked for everything she has. You've been coasting, and your mother's been covering for you. A ripple of murmurs spread around the table, the first signs of long-held thoughts finally bubbling to the surface. Daniel's cheeks burned as he looked from one relative to the next, waiting for someone to back him up. But no one did. My mother's eyes widened with fury. She pointed at me like I was the source of all the poison now spilling out. You see what you've done? You've ruined Christmas. You've turned everyone against us with your lies. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? Her words might have gutted me once, but not tonight. I sat up straighter, meeting her glare without blinking. I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending. If the truth makes you uncomfortable, that's not my problem. Her mouth opened as if to lash back again, but I didn't give her the chance. I'm done, I said firmly. I'm done begging for you to see me, to be proud of me, to treat me like I matter. I've wasted too many years chasing something you'll never give. I don't need your approval anymore. The silence that followed was heavy, but for the first time, I felt no shame in it. No tears pressed at the back of my eyes, no lump in my throat. I wasn't the timid girl at the edge of the room anymore. I was standing on my own ground, and nothing she said could take that away. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood, louder than I intended but fitting for the moment. Every eye followed me as I stood. My plate was still half full, the holiday meal untouched, but I didn't care. I reached for my coat draped over the back of the chair, slipping it on without rushing. My mother was still fuming, Daniel's jaw tight with anger, but I had no interest in hearing another word. I'm leaving, I said simply, my voice steady. I don't owe anyone here another minute of my time. No one moved to stop me. A few relatives shifted awkwardly, but not a single person rose from their seat. The room felt heavy, like the air had been sucked out, yet my steps toward the door were light. I had spent years sitting through scenes just like this one, swallowing my pride, pretending it didn't hurt. But tonight, I was finished with all of it. The cold air hit me as soon as I stepped outside. My breath curled in the night, snowflakes drifting down onto the quiet street. I walked to my car, hands trembling slightly as I fished for the keys, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline, it was release. The engine hummed to life, headlights casting a glow on the frost-covered driveway. I pulled out slowly, leaving the house behind me. As the distance grew, the tension began to loosen. A knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years started to unravel. Sadness clung to me at first, a hollow ache in my chest. This was supposed to be family, a place of safety, and instead it had always been a battlefield. Driving through the quiet streets lined with Christmas lights, I couldn't help but feel the loss of what I never really had. But layered beneath the sorrow was something else, something stronger. For once, I had stood my ground. I hadn't let her words define me, not this time. That was the real victory. Not a sharp comeback, not the shock on their faces, but the proof that I no longer lived under her control. With every mile I put between myself and that house, the weight grew lighter. I rolled down the window despite the chill, letting the wind sting my face, welcoming the sharp bite of freedom. It dawned on me then. Revenge wasn't about cutting her down with insults of my own. It was about showing her, and everyone else, that I had carved out a life of worth she could never take from me. She had tried for years to keep me small, but I wasn't small anymore. For the first time in my life, I gripped the wheel and felt powerful. I wasn't running away, I was moving forward, and she couldn't follow. The weeks after that night felt strangely quiet. I kept waiting for the phone to ring, for the storm to follow me home, but instead there was silence. At first, it was unsettling, like standing in the eye of a hurricane, but soon it became something else, peaceful. Then slowly, messages began to trickle in. My aunt called one evening, her voice low and apologetic. She admitted she should have spoken up at the table, that she had seen the pattern for years, but never had the courage to confront it. Another relative sent me a card in the mail, a handwritten note tucked inside. You were brave. I'm sorry we let you stand alone. I hadn't expected any of it. For so long, it felt like the whole family accepted the way things were, laughing along, staying silent. Hearing them finally acknowledge, it was both comforting and bittersweet. It didn't undo the past, but it showed me that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been crazy to feel hurt all those years. Daniel, on the other hand, vanished. No texts, no calls, no chance encounters. If I saw his name pop up in a family group message, he stayed quiet, never addressing me directly. I imagined his embarrassment, the sting of having his freeloading pointed out in front of everyone. For once, he couldn't hide behind charm or jokes. And then there was my mother. Not a word, not even a cold message to scold me. Relatives hinted that she was furious, telling them I had been out of line, insisting I had humiliated her in front of everyone. But I didn't chase her. I didn't defend myself. I didn't beg for her to see it differently, because something inside me had shifted that night. For the first time, I realized I didn't need her voice in my life, her approval, her praise. It had always been a moving target, one I could never reach no matter how hard I tried. Letting go of that chase was like unclenching a fist I hadn't realized had been tight for decades. I threw myself into work, where my efforts were valued. My team respected me, my patients trusted me, and each day ended with the knowledge that I had made a difference. That mattered more than any hollow compliment she could have given. At home, I allowed myself to enjoy the quiet evenings in the house I had earned. I cooked simple meals, curled up with books I never had time for before, and let the silence wrap around me like something healing instead of lonely. I wasn't waiting for her call anymore. I wasn't waiting for her to finally see me. The truth was simple. I had built a life without her approval, and that life was enough. Months passed, the seasons shifting from the gray of winter into the bright green of spring. I had fallen into a rhythm that felt steady and calm. Long shifts at the hospital, quiet mornings in my own kitchen, evenings where I didn't have to brace for criticism. For a while, it almost felt like the past had loosened its grip on me. Then the phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. My mother's name glowed on the screen, and for a moment I just stared at it. She hadn't called once since Christmas. My thumb hovered, part of me ready to send it to voicemail. But something made me answer. Her voice came sharp at first, but with an edge of desperation she couldn't hide. She told me Daniel was in trouble, credit cards maxed out, bills piling up, collectors calling. He needed help, and she expected me to step in. "You've got money now," she said. "You can cover some of this. Family takes care of family." I listened, letting the words settle, calm as still water. When she finally paused, waiting for me to agree, I spoke softly but firmly. "You always said I was stupid. Maybe you should ask your smart son to help you." There was nothing on the other end. No scolding, no snapping comeback. Just silence. For the first time in my life, my mother had no words. I didn't wait for her to recover. I ended the call, setting the phone down gently on the counter. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. Instead, I felt light, as if something I had been carrying for years had finally been set down for good. It hit me then. This was the real victory. Not raising my voice, not throwing her insults back at her, but living in a way that proved her wrong every single day. I had built a life without her, a strong one, a steady one. That was revenge enough. I walked to the window, sunlight spilling across the floor, and let myself smile. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't bitter. It was pure, quiet freedom. I was no longer her shadow. I was my own. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories.